Diversity, equity, and inclusion. What's in it for me? 2020 was a year with more twists and turns than any of us could ever have imagined. Coronavirus alone forced us to reset our thinking about what it means to be a community, what it means for our individual actions to have collective consequences. In my presentations on diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm hoping to shed light on how each of us can contribute to making this world, our country, our organizations, and ourselves better places to live and better colleagues to each other. These two modules will help you, yes, you, to examine yourself and your understanding of what diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you. Self-education is where this work really takes place. We cannot possibly make a difference in this area if we are not willing to trouble, challenge, and explore how we came to see the world the way that we do. Through these video modules and engaging supplemental activities, I hope to help you be a better we. One of the most important taglines that I have learned from Kiwanis is that one can make a difference. Believe that you can be that one. So as I stated previously, this module and the next are designed to help you think about your own knowledge, skills, and attitudes when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. By being self-reflective as you listen to the modules, it is my hope that you will be able to assess for yourself where you would like to put your efforts related to being a culturally relevant leader. No good facilitator would start a session without setting the objectives for the lesson. By the end of this module, participants should be able to remember key language associated with diversity, equity, and inclusion, connect diversity, equity, and inclusion concepts with real-life situations, and finally, be able to describe the knowledge, skills, and attitudes of culturally relevant leaders. Let's get started. This first module will discuss key terms and language related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some of these terms may be familiar to you. However, some of them can have multiple meanings. So I want to make sure we are all using a common language and definitions when talking about these concepts. The terms listed here are keywords that we have been hearing quite a bit about lately. The dual pandemics of the coronavirus and the racial and social injustice throughout the world has sparked a renewed commitment to examining the value of bringing greater awareness of unequal health and economic outcomes being experienced by the most marginalized people in our societies. How many of these terms do you think you already know? So let's talk about diversity. Merriam-Webster defines diversity as the condition of having or being composed of differing elements. For the purposes of our lesson, we expand that definition to state that diversity is the inclusion of different types of people, people of different races, ethnicities, and cultures in a group or organization. Diversity is being able to see the full spectrum of human attributes, perspectives, backgrounds, and talents. Effective leaders are skillful in promoting and encouraging diversity within their organizations. They reflect attitudes that are authentic regarding the value of every person on the team, and they are deliberate about developing teams that include a variety of characteristics, identities, and lived experience of the team members. 21st century leaders, like many of you are, understand that diversity in thought, culture, identity, and ability is necessary for organizations and relationships to be innovative and successful. Diversity is about leveraging our differences to make our organizations and relationships stronger. Let's move on to talk about equality and equity. These words are often used interchangeably, but they have different meanings. Look at these two pictures. There are 3 boxes in each picture, but the boxes are distributed differently. Why do you think that distribution makes a difference? Let's watch this short video to learn more. Pause the module here for just a moment or two and think about the organizations or teams that you are a part of. Do you think that everyone has what they need to be successful representing equity, or is everyone provided the same resources and opportunities, making sure that everything is equal? We've talked about diversity, equity, and equality. Now let's discuss what leaders need to know about inclusion and creating an inclusive environment. Inclusion is an action word. It requires leaders and teams to be engaged, active, and intentional with diverse groups of people. An inclusive environment is one where awareness and acceptance is the norm and not the exception. It means that leaders are making sure that everyone is heard and that their perspectives are valued. How different are the members of your teams? Is there a difference in how people think? Is there diversity in race and ethnicity? Differences in spiritual beliefs and values? Do you believe that there can actually be strength in the differences on your teams? As complex as it can be, there is beauty and strength when we have diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sometimes in leadership, it can be a little scary to bring different people together. What if they don't like each other? What if there are differences in religion or socioeconomic status? Well, those are definitely possibilities. But the alternative to not creating inclusive environments is creating an exclusive environment. Exclusive environments means somebody is left out of the group or organization. Somebody feels or knows that they are different in an isolating way from everyone else. Exclusion usually occurs because of one of the many isms that we have, like ageism, classism, racism, ableism, just to name a few. But no matter what the cause, exclusion, whether intentional or not, will only serve to divide the team, inhibit progress, and create a toxic place to work. The isms are the pretty obvious ways that we exclude people, but there are even more subtle and unintentional ways that exclusion can happen and harm our relationships and organizations. I'd like to share a story with you here. This is a true story. There was an African American professor at a university with a predominantly white faculty. This African American professor was very successful in his research, often bringing in large amounts of research dollars, something that is very important in a university setting. He also had exceptional teaching evaluations. His courses were often the first classes to fill up at the beginning of the semester. Many of the measures that matter in an academic culture, this professor seemed to exceed and excel at. After being here for 4 semesters, he announced that he was leaving. This caught his colleagues by shock. They murmured to themselves as to what could have caused him to want to leave. He was going to a smaller university, so the idea that he was being drawn by salary didn't seem like a good one. Finally, one reached out and asked why he was leaving. And here was his response. Since being here at this university, I have never felt like I was a part of the community. People were cordial, and I never felt like there were racist attitudes. However, not once since I've been here has anyone gone to lunch or dinner with me. I've never met anyone's family or even had an opportunity to discuss my family. I hear in the hallway how many of the colleagues here go to their children's birthday parties, spend time together over the weekend. I had to wonder if it was my race that prevented these more inclusive kind of opportunities that others seem to be enjoying, that I just never seemed to have an opportunity to participate in. It often left me feeling very lonely, despite the success of my grantsmanship and my teaching success. So I decided that it was best for me to leave. I decided that it just didn't make sense for me to be here and be as lonely as I was when I would have an opportunity to go to other places where perhaps I could feel like I was more a part of the community, where I didn't have to feel quite as isolated as I felt here. The colleague shared what he had learned with the others, and there was such a sense of sadness and embarrassment at how unintentionally their inability to actually see their colleague had caused not only his departure,
but clearly a personal hurt.
This story is just one example of how unintentional exclusion can happen if diversity and inclusion is not explicitly and purposefully supported in our organizations. Now let's learn about two topics that may be less known or understood: acronyms and pluralism. Probably one of the most difficult things to do when working on being more conscious and committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion is knowing what words and meanings can change very quickly. When words change their meanings, particularly when the words are describing specific groups of people, it can be hard to always know what the politically correct thing is to say. You may unintentionally disrespect someone without even knowing it. There is not an easy answer to keep from making these errors. You can only be aware that they can occur. Now let's talk about acronyms. Acronyms are very common ways to talk about a group of people who typically share common characteristics, values, or life experiences. You may already know that LGBTQ is the acronym for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. But did you know that the plus represents other sexual identities and gender nonconforming people? POC or POC is the acronym for people of color and is typically used to identify any group of people who do not identify as white. Perhaps you've seen on the news or on the internet the acronym BIPOC. It's a relatively new acronym. BIPOC represents Black, Indigenous people of color. It differs from POC as a way to acknowledge that not all people of color experience the same levels of injustice. It is important to know that all of these terms, LGBTQ, POC, BIPOC, they're all used to describe large groups of people and very diverse people at that. They are often called umbrella terms. Please be cautious when making generalizations about people who may be described by one of these terms. The final concept that I would like to discuss in this module is pluralism. Pluralism is a term that is not used as often as some of the other words we have talked about, but it is a word that has significant meaning in understanding the importance of inclusive and exclusive behaviors and ideologies. Pluralism is most commonly used when discussing religion. Religious pluralism recognizes that there is truth and value in knowing that different belief systems and spiritual practices can coexist in the same society. One way for an organization to evaluate their commitment to a pluralistic environment is by examining the physical representations that are present in the pictures, logos, and celebrations that the organization promotes. For instance, the winter holidays, typically celebrated during the month of December, include Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa, and sometimes Ramadan. But more often than not, the decorations, symbols, and celebrations are not inclusive of more than one of those holidays. Does your organization decorate for the winter holidays with representations from more than one of those groups that are celebrated in December? If your organization is made up of primarily of people who celebrate only one of those holidays, would that mean it's not necessary to acknowledge the other holidays? This module had quite a bit of information in it, so do not be afraid to watch it again if you feel like you may have missed something. Additionally, there will be supplemental material for this module that will give you a chance to reflect more on these concepts. See you in Module 2, where we will discuss unconscious bias.